Hello everybody and welcome back to Ryujin Tech. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to create the enhanced input and mapping context files for your Unreal Engine project. We're going to be building this off of the third-person shooter kit. The previous tutorial that I had, I provided the files for the input actions and for the mapping context files, but several of you have reached out with issues where when you open up the context files, they're completely empty. I don't quite have a reason for this. I haven't been able to identify anything. Potentially GitHub is, maybe there's some issue when you download from there. So one thing that I did end up doing, I did re-upload the files inside of the enhanced input. So we have the actions and we have the mappings, but some people are still having issues. So what I also did was I created a zip file here, and this zip file has all of the actions and the mappings. It's basically the same enhanced input folder, but then zipped. And so I'm just going to show that if I do download this, it does work for me. So your mileage may vary. It may work for you, it may not work for you, but I'm doing the guide here to be able to show you how to create it from scratch anyways, which is good to know. So that way, if you want to make changes, you can do it later. But if we go in, we can see that we have all of the actions and the mappings as expected. And so if I copy the enhanced input folder and then I open up the project, I'm just going to click on this first blueprint here, and I'm going to select show in Explorer. This is going to open up this file explorer for me inside of the blueprint folder for my project. And then inside of here, I'm going to paste the enhanced input folder. And then now this enhanced input folder is already inside of my project now. And so if I go in, I can see that I have actions, and then I also have the mappings. And so if I open up the default keyboard, for example, all of my mapping files are here with all of the data that I expect to have be in here. But again, some of you are having issues with being able to get this to work. So I'm going to roll into a tutorial on how to get this set up. One last thing to look at before we get started is just have a quick understanding of the input actions and how they're set up, so that way we can understand how the mapping is affecting how these are triggered. So most of the actions, such as IA aiming, are going to be a value type digital boolean. So what this means is this is a boolean, yes, the key is pressed, or no, the key is not pressed. It's pretty simple and straightforward. Most of the input actions, such as aiming, any key, FPP aiming, use, toggle flashlight, toggle camera, weapon fire, all of these are going to be Boolean values. So that's going to be the most common type. We have our other input actions, such as IA look mouse and IA movement, where the value type is of axis 2D or a 2D vector. So what this means is your input has input along two axes. So you have the x-axis, which is horizontal, and then you have your y-axis, which is vertical, if you're looking at it on a screen. And so then we take this mapping, and then this mapping ends up being correlated to input in your blueprint. And so the up and down on the y-axis, for example, can change your pitch, can change moving forward, moving backwards. And then the change along the x-axis can change your aiming left and right. It can change your strafing from left to right, depending on what the input is. And so for IA aiming, all of the buttons that are mapped to this are just doing a I'm pressed, I'm not pressed. And then your 2D axis is the input is being set up such a way that all four, if we break it down to four axis, where you have your one axis on X, 0 and positive, another axis on X, which is 0 and negative, and then on Y you would have 0 and positive, and then 0 and negative. And then you set up your inputs such that, like WASD, where W is doing positive Y and S is doing negative Y, D is doing positive X, and A is doing negative X. And that's how you get the different access inputs that we then take in our character blueprint to be able to interact with the world around us using the keyboard inputs. So I've gone and deleted the other mappings that I had, and I just have the default keyboard and mouse mapping file. So this is what some of you are seeing when you open up the mapping file. There's no data that's inside of it. And so what we need to do now is add our mappings and then put in the associated buttons. If you are unsure of what buttons to use, we have the default ones that are set up. If you go to Edit and Project Settings, then we go down to Input. Then here we have the list of the original mapping files as they came with the project. So we have our action mapping. So these are going to be all of our Boolean type input actions. And then we have our axis mappings, which are going to be like our axis 2D with the eye look and the movement. And so what we have in here is we can see what buttons are being mapped, whether it's keyboard or gamepad. But in our setup, at least the one that I propose, is having it split up. So you have one mapping for keyboard, one mapping for gamepad. It makes it easier to manage and maintain. But I guess at the end of the day, it's all up to your individual preference. So the other option is, outside of this, is if you go into the enhanced input tracker, I have the list of the original mapping files, or the original mappings on the left, which match with the mappings that are here inside of the input bindings. And then you have the original buttons that were mapped to it. And then you have the input action that's created for doing the migration. And if you select any of these, it'll bring you to how to actually do the migration inside of the blueprints. And then we have the keys that were mapped to it and the mapping context files that I had uploaded. And so some of you aren't getting anything. And so we have to handle this project or this process manually. So you can get the buttons here. You can also get the button mappings that are inside of the project settings inside of input. This is definitely a great place to go. If you've already changed your mappings to something custom that you prefer, just come and grab them from here, and that's totally fine. Okay, so to get started, the easiest thing for me is to just go alphabetically. So to add a new mapping, you're just gonna hit the plus, and then we have this drop down, and then select your mapping. And so I'm just gonna go through this one by one and just add in the new mappings in here. So I have IA aiming, and so I can select the key value and then just press the button that I want for this. Or I didn't mean to delete the whole thing. Or you can select the drop down, and then you can go through any of these buttons as preferred. So they have gamepad buttons, keyboard, mouse, Steam Touch controllers, Valve Index, everything in here. So easiest way for me though is just select and push the button for whatever I want the input to be. And then I'm just going to go through and do this for all of them. Most of them are going to be relatively simple, and I will stop and slow down once I get to something that's a little bit more intricate here. One issue that you are going to run into, and it's a bug, not a feature of Unreal Engine, is when you go and create a new mapping, eventually things will start getting kind of cluttered because there's so much stuff. And when you go to click a new mapping, it'll automatically unfold everything for you, which is not really the ideal behavior. So one of the things I find to be easiest is if we right click and collapse all, add, and then expand, then it's not as cluttered for everything. However, when you go and click the next action, it'll still go through and do this. So it's kind of obnoxious, but it's just something that we have to learn to work around and just kind of deal with at that point. Okay, so here is an interesting one. Let me clean the rest of this up here real quick. So for the IA look, if you remember, look mouse is a 2D vector. So unlike the other buttons where we just been adding in the single button and moving on, IA look will be a little bit different. So what I want to do here is I want to get the mouse, and then I want to get the mouse XY 2D axis. So this 2D axis is already the mouse, so the X and the Y. So sideways is X, up and down is Y. And then we have our modifiers that we can add in here as well. And so one of the modifiers to add in here, potentially depending on how you want, and then you can also modify it inside of the blueprints for how your character is handling the input, is doing a negate here. And so what this negate allows us to be able to do is negate the values on an axis. So going positive Y ends up becoming negative, and going negative Y ends up becoming positive. So it just inverses your yaw. And so that's inverses your pitch. And so that may or may not give you expected behavior that you want. I can show a demonstration on how this works at the end of the video here. But the reason why we have this negated is because that's how it was set up initially. So if you don't have this toggled and you leave this as off, or you just don't have this modifier in here, you may find that your input is inverted, and that may not be expected behavior. So you can just come in here and negate it, and then make sure it's only negated on the Y. Otherwise, if the negate on the Y is messing you up, you can get rid of the negate modifier on here. The IA look stick is only going to be for the gamepad and not for the mouse. Since we're doing mapping file for the keyboard, we are not going to implement that. Okay, now we're at movement. So movement is going to be another 2D axis. So the 2D axis is going to be set up a little bit differently than how even the mouse was set up. So if we go back to the IA look mouse, we just have the mouse XY. The mouse device itself provides all the input that we need. We don't have that with the keyboard because we don't have a button that's got the movement like a joystick does, or something of that nature. So we have to handle this a little bit differently. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have 8 inputs here. 1, 2. Man, this is going to be rough to work with. Okay, so we have our 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Perfect. Okay, so what we're going to do on these is we're going to select the keys that we want for a movement. So that's going to be W, and up arrow, S, and down arrow, A, left arrow, D, right arrow. Okay, so the D and the right arrow are already good the way that they are because the modifiers are empty. And so on the axis, X gets the priority. So everything's going to be positive X initially. So we want this to be positive X. So that's going to be pushing to the right. The left arrow needs to be pointing in the inverse direction. So to the left. And so we're going to add a modifier, and we're going to negate. And then we're going to do the same thing on the left arrow, is we're going to add this modifier, and we're going to negate. Then for the W and the up, so we need to switch axis here because this is going to be positive Y instead of positive X. So to switch the axis, we're going to use swizzle input axis values. We're going to use this modifier on both the up and the W key. And so what swizzle does is it switches the axis, so it'll rotate it from X to Y or Y to X. And so in this case, we want Y, but it's going to be positive because we want up. And then S and down are going to be similar in that we're going to swizzle to change from the x-axis to the y-axis, but we're going to add one more modifier on here to negate. And so what this negate does is allows it to be a negative y instead of a positive y, so it'll be in the downward direction. And then this will allow us to be able to have our WASD and up, down, left, right arrows, providing the 2D axis for the movement here. And then now we can move on to the rest. Okay, and there we have it. So now we have all of the input actions that are in the game properly mapped. So we have individual buttons, and then we also have our 2D axis set up with the look mouse and with the movement here. And so that's great. And then now we can go over and start setting up for the basis for the gamepad as well. To start setting up our gamepad input mapping context, all we need to do is create a duplicate of the keyboard and mouse and then do a rename on it. So instead of IMC default keyboard mouse, we can do default gamepad. And then the reason why copying is because it gives us access to all of the mappings that we already had. So we don't have to go through the dropdown and add everything again. But we do need to go through and reset all of the buttons that are in here. And so again, kind of in the same manner, we're going to go through and set everything up. So we just select the button. Any key, we can just leave as any key. We should be good to go on that one. The center camera button, obviously we don't want the keyboard anymore, so we're just going to go through here and we're just going to be selecting the buttons that we want to be having set for all of this. Oh, I messed up the first one here. So the aiming is supposed to be the trigger, but if you notice, when I press the trigger on here, we get the left trigger axis. So the way that the triggers work here is that they work on a scale, so 0 to 100. You can think of it as like a percent. So you have the ability to have anything that's in between from 100% selected to 0%. That's not how we want this particular behavior to work. With the aiming, we want it either on or off. So what we need to do instead is set up the aiming so that way it's using the gamepad left trigger only and not the axis. So we can just select the left trigger and then be done on that. Okay, and then for the look mouse here, we don't want the look mouse. We want to use the IA look stick. So we just swap that out. And then instead of the mouse 2D axis, we want the thumbstick. But if I press and select the thumbstick, I only get whichever axis is being used when I make the call here. So what I need to do is do gamepad right thumbstick, and then I want the 2D axis. And so what that allows for me to be able to do is have the thumbstick already handle all of the axis movement for me. I don't have to do anything else. And then we can leave the modifier that we had previously set up from the keyboard. Okay, so the movement is going to be a little bit different as well. So we do have the ability, if we wanted, where we could just select the actual gamepad buttons here. So we do gamepad left thumbstick, thumbstick up, and then we could get rid of the up. And then for the S, instead, we're going to grab thumbstick down. We can get rid of the down arrow. And then for A, we're going left. And so we're just going to grab the thumbstick left, get rid of the left arrow, get rid of the right arrow. And then D, we would just swap out to right. So this would work totally fine. No worries on this at all. One option that we could also have is we can get rid of all of this, and then we can just grab the thumbstick 2D axis, and then the 2D axis will work for all of this. So we don't have to handle all of the up, down, left, right cases individually. It's already going to be set up because the joystick has all of those axes already included into it. And then I also wanted to show how to be able to, how some of these things actually change the input. So again, if we go to the IA look, we have that the Y is toggled. So if I go and I play, you'll see that when I push the mouse forward, I aim up. When I pull the mouse backwards, I aim down. If I go into IMC default keyboard mouse and I turn off the negate for the Y, and then I go and I play, now when I press forward on the mouse, I aim down, and when I pull backwards on the mouse, I aim up. So it inverts my pitch. And so that gives you an idea of how that actually works. So hopefully that gets you rolling with being able to set up the default mapping files for this project. Now, since you have the enhanced input set up for everything else. And then the last part on it is the way that the new setup is that we're not tracking the state of keys. We don't care what button is being pressed. We're just consuming whatever is setting off the input action. So the enhanced input action look mouse is only being triggered by the mouse because that's what it's set up for. But if we were to come into movement, for example, and we have IA movement, this IA movement gets set off by both the keyboard and the mouse because we have different input actions that are or different inputs that are set up to the action itself. So all we're tracking is the action. We don't care about the keys anymore, and it should simplify the development and implementation of your game through the blueprint. Again, if you have any questions or comments, just drop them in the comment section below, and I will see you all in the next video.